Welcome back to the Triangle and Two podcast, also available on YouTube. We appreciate you listening, however you're getting this content. I'm Brian Murphy with WRAL, joined once again by former UNC quarterback Bryn Renner. Hit that like and subscribe button if you would. That way you won't miss any of the conversations between me and Bryn. And it does feel like we're having the same conversation over and over again. North Carolina loses at Wake Forest 28 I guess 28-9 in a bizarre finish. Maybe the most interesting part of this game was the end of the game. Belichick is catching a lot of heat for sort of the blow-by that he had with Jake Dickert, the Wake Forest coach, for the post-game handshake, and just a strange turn of events, I guess, at the end of that game with Bill Belichick calling a timeout with about 25 seconds left when it appeared Wake Forest was going to just run out the clock, and then Wake Forest comes back and scores a garbage touchdown, end of the meaningless touchdown, not garbage, but meaningless touchdown. And I know some bettors had the under, and that pushed it over the 39.5. So that put it at 40. So meaningful to some, but in the context of the game, meaningless. You've been in the game, you've coached on the sidelines. What happened there at the end of this game?
Yeah, it was competitive intensity. I think a little bit on both sides. Wake Forest obviously had the game in hand, and I believe they were truly trying to kneel the ball out. They ran it on first down, ran it on second down, and then you still have to get time in situation. And we were still calling timeouts, and then we stopped calling timeouts, and then there was a competitive intensity, and everyone knows this on each sideline. One team's already victorious, the other team's kind of pissed off, and I think it just got to that point, Brian, where Coach Belichick was trying to, use all his resources in his timeouts. And I do think Wake Forest has, look, they haven't beat Carolina in 4 years. And we have to understand the magnitude of how many teams want to beat North Carolina. It's just the way it is across the board. And I think it was one of those moments where you saw a young coach, first year in the program, try to make a statement. And you saw players like DeMont Claiborne, who hasn't beat Carolina. You got Robbie Ashford, who's been to a lot of different places. He wanted to punch it in, and the game was chippy, for 4 quarters. It really was. Wake Forest was playing to the whistle, especially hitting guys out of bounds. They got one personal foul call, and I think it got to that point where Coach Belichick was trying to use his timeout, and Coach Dickert was like, well, if you're going to keep calling timeouts, we're going to score, and they ran it in from 12 yards. And then there was a scrum at the end of the game, and I think, I've been in games like that, Brian, on both sides. And I think it really needs to be settled between the whistles. But sometimes the coaches get involved where they want to make a statement. I think that's what happened. And I don't fault either guy. I think where it's a neutral point where Coach Belichick's trying to do what's best for the program, and there might have been a little bit pissed off of you trying to still go trying to win, and then Coach Dickert, I don't blame him either. It's a part of competitive sports and why it makes it great. But Carolina had 4 quarters to try to make it right, and it didn't happen. So at the end of the day, if you're in the winning end and you're winning, you're really in total control.
I mean, one of the contrasts of this game, and I think we have to get into it, is both programs had a new coach last year, and Carolina went. I've talked to boards of trustees members. Jake Dickert was not on any list that they put together. They wanted the biggest, flashiest, splashiest hire they could get. And John Currie, the AD at Wake Forest, went out and tried to find the best football coach that he thought he could get for his program. And you look at a young guy like Jake Dickert, and I wonder, if everyone was being honest, if you'd rather have Jake Dickert as your head coach than Bill Belichick, not based on resume, not based on history. Obviously, Bill Belichick is one of the greatest coaches of all time, but for this moment in college football and for his ability and given the schedule you had this year, you just look and you say, well, if he get 7-3 with Wake's roster and Wake's schedule, what could he have done at Carolina with this schedule? And the talent they had, and maybe he wouldn't have made some different decisions. But you just look and you think, this is the uncomfortable conversation. Would Carolina have been better off going with a younger coach, more attuned to the college game? Certainly, they may have had more success this year. We'll see if it was a better long-term strategy. And but it may not have gotten all the attention that they wanted. So I think there are some trade-offs. But I think after watching that game, hard not to say, man, how come Carolina couldn't find a guy like this to be their next head coach?
Yeah, Brian, I think it's a very fair conversation to have. And you look at football's a game of records. We're 4-6 and they're 7-3. It's just is what it is. And at the end of the day, football's a game of you get judged every single Saturday, and right now they're the better football team. And that's very, very evident with what we watched on Saturday. So it's fair conversation to have. I think what I noticed, especially seeing the different sidelines, and we've talked about this since TCU game, is the amount of energy that the other programs have. I talked about it with Clemson and Dabo and how they coach, and not saying it's different, but I also think that you make a good point of the energy level on Saturday was clear that Wake Forest had an intent to win. And I'm not saying Carolina didn't, but there's a different type of purpose and intentionality. You know, they had blocked 2 field goals. That's going above and beyond. The guy jumps over one of our guys. There's effort plays that happened that can be coached as well, and it looked like they had more intensity. So I really hats off to Wake Forest and their entire program. But Brian, I told you this before we got on. I never thought I'd see the day that Wake Forest would just go and manhandle North Carolina, but that's what happened, and we have to be honest about it. And that's kind of what's been the trend. And I think the difference that I want to point out is college football is based on emotions, and you're dealing with 18-year-old kids that you really have to get hyped up for a Saturday. And in the pros, you don't have to do that. That guy's got kids, he's got a wife, he's got a contract that he has to fulfill, no matter who the coach is. So I think in college football, you play for that coach. And something that Wake Forest did was they had this mantra of built in the dark, and you kind of have those cliche sayings to get those guys motivated because it is such a team sport. And like I said, it's different than pro football, and I think we're kind of seeing that on each sidelines every single Saturday.
I mean, the biggest whole thing holding this North Carolina team back, and we're not breaking any news here, is the offense. We were talking, Wake. Let's be honest, they scored a lucky touchdown to start that game. Quarterback fumbles, wide receiver picks it up after a bunch of guys have dove on the ground, and one of the fastest guys on the field runs all the way to the end zone, and 7-0 Wake Forest. And you think, okay, well, that's the first drive of the game. But given how bad Carolina's offense has been, it really felt like, oh man, I don't know if Carolina can, like, that was a fluke touchdown, and you're going to have events like that, but I just don't know if Carolina can recover. Being down 7-0 feels like a mountain. I mean, we saw Texas A&M come back from, a 27-point deficit at halftime. Uh, I just don't feel like Carolina can even come back from being down 9. You get it to 2 possessions, forget it. I don't know that they have enough offensive firepower to come back, and that was once again the issue. 0 touchdowns, settled for 5 field goal attempts, only made 3, 2 blocked. It just feels like this offense is maybe going backwards.
Yeah, Brian, I'm kind of speechless on what I saw on Saturday, to be honest, because we've had 10 weeks and we've seen the same product. I think a lot of people are frustrated in the program. But I'll say this: if you can't score, you can't win, and it's happening to us. And we've held our defense has held teams where they can't score and they can't win, and now it's happening to us where we can't score and we can't have a chance to win. As simple as that. And this is the first time that UNC has not scored a touchdown in 9 years. 9 years. And I think it's in modern day football, it's really hard not to score a touchdown. I just think it is. I think some things that I'm seeing, Brian, is one, lack of a run game. If we don't have a run game, we really have no offense. I think that when we run a play and we call a play, we're getting the bare minimum out of that play. The guys aren't breaking tackles. There's limited explosive plays. I believe we only have one pass over 20 yards. And there's not much efficiency when that happens. And like you said, when there's a backwards momentum in a drive, everyone feels like, that's the end of the drive because we're not going to be able to generate any momentum down the field. So I think it's definitely frustrating. I mean, you look at 4 field goals were successful, and then you got 2 blocked, and when you got to the 30-yard line 5 times. You should be able to punch it in from that area. And I think I want to commend one guy, Jordan Schiff. He really had a great post-game interview and really took accountability. I think that's what you have to do at this point, from coaches, players, and the entire staff. You have to really take accountability for the lack of production. And Brian, it's the name of the game. I'm at a loss for words, but I think at some point you got to make some changes. You really do. We're not clicking. There's things that are still continuing to happen. And as a whole, I think as a program, we have to find an answer at the quarterback position. We have to find an answer at spots where people can be explosive. And I think everyone around the program is kind of tired of the cliche answers as well. Like, we have to find some answers that are effective, and changes need to be made, with the next 2 weeks. And we have a chance to get bowl eligible. So I think it's an accountability issue, and if while I was in the locker room, I would kind of be losing my mind, and a sense of urgency needs to happen. And people got to start getting upset on the sidelines. They have to say this is not acceptable, and we got to go make plays. And there's got to be a sense of urgency. It's completely unacceptable.
Yeah, 28-12 ended up being the final, 6 field goals. It's hard to believe in modern college football, you're taking 6 field goal attempts. Um, a couple things. You talked about some changes, and I wanna go through some of those, but I do wonder, and this is why you're on, you're the expert. They lost Chad Lindbergh, the center, a
Mhm.
couple weeks ago, and they had to move Blasky in from tackle to center, and it just feels like the run game that had been productive and then found some momentum seems to have kind of gone away after that. I wonder how much that shift on the offensive line is maybe playing a role in it.
Yeah, no doubt. I think when you lose Chad, he was such a focal point of that offense, and I think the center is the anchor, right? He makes all the protection, he makes the checks, and he's really kind of the guy to point guard that offensive line. And anytime you lose a center, have to play a backup or move things around the offensive line, it really hurts. And you got a freshman left tackle who's playing for the first time in Hall, and they're doing well. It's just there's not much consistency up front, like you mentioned, and it's hard. It's really hard, to run the ball and run the ball effectively when you have such movement. So it's a great point. I think Blassie's doing a great job, and he's gotten better. And look, that kid's a warrior. He's played all 5 positions on the offensive line. He's a really good kid, and he's played decent. I think sometimes when you get better opponents that are when you lack a passing game and there's no passing game, Brian, you're really got 8 people in the box, and that's what Wake Forest did. They weren't Belichick said it before, and I watched it on the film, and I agreed with him. Coming into the game on base down and distance on first and second down, they didn't do anything special. It was when you got the third down, it was a must pass down that they would kind of heat you up, and that's really what happened. And they played more physical. They really did, and like I said, sometimes running the ball, Brian, is more of a will to win than it is technique, and it's a physicality, it's a mentality, and we haven't had that for 10 weeks.
We mentioned some changes, and I think people are going to focus on three things, right? The quarterback, the offensive coordinator, and the general manager to some degree, because he's the one responsible for bringing all this together. Um, let's walk through at least the first two of those that where you're intimately familiar with kind of how it works at that quarterback position. Again, we've talked about Geo a bunch of times, and I don't want to get into that. If you're a coach, when do you look at, okay, Carolina still has a chance to get bowl eligible, but is it time to try one of these freshmen? Try a Torrey Newkirk, try a Bryce Baker. Like Geo's just not giving us what we necessarily need, and maybe it's not all his fault, but the offense isn't moving. And then when do you start to look at the offensive coordinator and say, it's not working. It's not working with Freddie Kitchens calling the plays. Do we try someone else to call the plays for the last 2 weeks? Like, how does a coaching staff sort of make those decisions?
Yeah, and like we said, we're not here to kind of get anybody fired. Or I've been on both sides. I've been bench fired and cut. Like I get it. And football's a very, very day by day business, right? One day you're on top of the mountain, the next day you're at the bottom. And I've experienced that. And all I can say is this: I think it's more of an off season decision. I think right now it's too dramatic to look. You're trying to get bowl eligible and do the best thing you can do to win. And sometimes making a dramatic change might not be the best. And sometimes it might be great. I think it's a decision that people around the building have to make. That's why they get paid the money to do it. They're around there every day, and I've always said that like that's your job, man. You have to have the pulse of the program to make a decision to play somebody if you think it's going to be to benefit the team, and that's why he's getting paid. That's why Coach Belichick's getting paid $10 million. And me personally, I think there's things that have to be done in the offseason to fix this, and I think they will. I think everybody's kind of on the edge of their seat to kind of for improvement. And I think that happens everywhere in business. No matter what business you are in, you want to improve. And right now we're not seeing that from the quarterback position, from the offensive coordinator, from everybody. I think everybody's got to be held accountable. And when you do your self scout, there needs to be some revisions. But right now, Brian, I think you just kind of have to play it out with whoever gives you the best chance to win. I think there's a ton of talent in that quarterback room, Geo included. I think sometimes, and we talked about this as well, it's the offensive coordinator and the quarterback being meshed. And nowadays you get to pick that. And it's really your free agents. So we can go get who we want. And I've mentioned this before. The number one spot on the coaching staff is the offense coordinator. I put that above the head coach. And we're seeing the evidence of that now. And you look at Drake and Josh McDaniel, extremely amount of success, driving force of that team. Um, And we're seeing that an offense can propel a defense, and you're seeing that in the NFL a lot. And look at Oklahoma. You mentioned it earlier before we got on. They brought Mateer and they brought the offense coordinator. And like a lot of teams are doing that now because it's such an important relationship to have. And I know I had it when I was in college. And it helps out a ton when that guy wants you to be the quarterback, and you're in sync calling plays and doing what he does best. And I think that's something that I'm seeing from offense. We're not doing the things that Geo does best. I don't think. And I think that's kind of something that needs to be evaluated in the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to break down there, but we have seen this offense. I guess I would put it this way: the Carolina fan base, if you bring back Freddie Kitchens as your offense coordinator and Gio Lopez as your quarterback, like I find it hard to believe that that fan base is going to be rally around that. They're going to be excited. So I think if you're the program, if you're Lombardi and Belichick, you've got to go find an offense coordinator, maybe one outside of your coaching tree, and you may look who can bring in a quarterback with them, like you just
Mhm.
discussed with John Mateer at Oklahoma. Same thing happened, I think, at UNLV, which is having a pretty good season. Can you bring in somebody or someone that guy is familiar with? Because, as you said, maybe the most important job on the team. Belichick, I mean, I think everyone trusts can get the defense to a certain level, to an acceptable level. They played really well over the last couple of weeks, but the offense just has got to be fixed. And I guess the again, I don't I feel like I criticize Gio a lot, but I would love to know what decision making went into this is the best quarterback for our program and for what we're going to do. There were a lot of quarterbacks in the transfer portal. That Ryan Brown was here in the spring, uh, and he was run off or he decided to leave. But what is the thought process that went into this guy from South Alabama is the best guy for our offense, and then not run an offense that maybe takes advantage of some of his running ability. It's just that's where as a journalist, as an outsider, I'm trying to figure out the thought process because if that thought process doesn't change, then it's hard to think how the results are going to change on the field.
I completely agree with you. I think you hit the nail on the head with all those points. I think we're all kind of scratching our heads at this point. It's week 10, and the production isn't there, and it has to be fixed. And like you said, sometimes it's not producing, and you have to move on, and you have to do things that are best for the program. And like I said, nowadays in sports and in football, you're a week by week basis. And right now, we're not getting the job done offensively. And I think you have to go look and you have to go reevaluate who's on your team. And I think that's at every position. Look, we brought in 70 new guys, right? Not all of them are having the ability to play this year. Where can we go and improve at each position? And really, like what the offseason usually is you go position by position, player by player, and you see where you can go and improve. And now with the early transfer portal, you only get one chance. So you got to kind of be on the cusp of, okay, what's the quarterback room going to look like? What's the running back room going to look like? Because we're going to lose kids. Kids are going to leave the program as well. They already have. So you kind of have to do your due diligence, and really, especially at the quarterback position, you can't miss. And I think if you miss, and I think I just take an example, like look at UVA. Like UVA got Chandler Morris, and that kid is gritty. He's tough. He's a competitor, and he's taking that team. And if they beat Virginia Tech, they're in the ACC title game. And by one player, he changed the entire program. And you see that around the country. I mean, I just think about what Lincoln Riley did for all those years, right? He brought Caleb Williams, Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield. Those guys were walk-ons, and he evaluated their talent. And he goes, "That guy fits my system." He might not be a pro-style quarterback, but they all turned out to be pros. It just happened to do that, but he trained them and molded them, and that's like when I was coaching, man, like a quarterback, when you brought him in on your recruiting visit, you really had to mesh with him. And does he fit my offense? Does he fit what I want him to do? And when I was calling plays, like it has to it has to mesh, it has to fit, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it does. And like I said, we're not bashing and saying Geo's not the answer. We're just saying it might be time for a fresh look elsewhere, and develop some competition, right? Like every year you got to compete for your job, Brian, because we saw this year, like Max played when Geo got hurt. You're going to have two guys, so that competition is extremely important at that position.
Yeah, you're right. All those guys were transfers. Baker and Caleb Williams, and Jalen Hurts. The one thing you mentioned, and I think so Carolina looks and says, all right, we got a great defensive line or a good enough defensive line. We got some good linebackers. Our secondary is okay. Those guys aren't necessarily going to be here next year. Like you
Mhm.
don't just get to add guys. Like you also got to hold on to all those guys. And so I just think the offseason is gonna be really interesting. Can they hold on to the guys they have developed? Because an Ohio State or a Miami or a Texas is out there trying to do the same thing. They're trying to upgrade their talent. So they're looking at who developed at Carolina or NC State or Duke or in the ACC and say, oh, we can offer them more money, you can offer a better chance at a championship. So you don't get to stay static and just add. Some of those good pieces are going away. And so the offseason is so fascinating. I wonder, um, having these last two games, Duke and NC State, and be with the chance to get bowl eligible, does that and you mentioned that maybe an offseason decision, does that preclude you because they're two rival games and because you
Mhm.
do still have the chance at bowl eligibility, you gotta try to ride it out. In the pros at this point, I'm sure Belichick would have turned it over to one of the younger players and said, "Okay, we're out of playoff contention. Let's see what you can do, Bryce Baker. Let's see what you can do, Torrey Newkirk." But because of bowl eligibility and because of that transfer portal that we talked about, and because you got two rivals, it kind of ties your hands a little bit. You have to try to win every game in college football sometimes.
Yeah, of course. I think you hit the nail on the head. If we were kind of out of bowl contention, I think it would be a different story. But I think if you look, you've kind of played 10 weeks with the guys you got, and you kind of want to see that because they've had the reps. I think especially against Duke and State, those two games for us, you know this, Brian, they're so amplified. It is a different type of atmosphere that we've had all year. So it might shock a young quarterback, and you don't want to stun his growth by doing that. And a lot of things go into playing a new quarterback. There's new snap counts. There's new plays that you have to run. He might not be able to run a complicated system. And I know, like, even when I was the backup for TJ, he was a 4-year guy, and I was a freshman. We had a totally different playbook for me of just things that I could run and handle. Right. So when you're going through this, you have to kind of think about the team as a whole and not just the individual player and how it would affect everybody. Um, and I think making that drastic change is kind of too late now. I think you kind of have to ride it out with who you have. And look, you're coming up on an off season where you have a spring ball, you have things like that where those kids can get reps and go compete. Especially at that position. And you talked about it. Duke's playing really good football. They didn't play well last week, and NC State's playing really good football. And this is going to be a different type of we thought Wake was bad. We thought Wake was going on the road at Wake was bad. I mean, these guys are now Wake's 82 miles away, and then you got Duke who's 22 miles or 11 miles away, and Raleigh's 22. I know the numbers in my head like the back of my, like, it was just the bus rides. And you better bring it because I think and I hate to say this, but I think we got punked against Wake Forest. They out challenged us. And so we have to rise to that challenge this week. And I don't really care who's playing. I think you can kind of this has got to be, the will to win type of moment, and you're playing Duke at home.
Yeah, and both of those teams are fighting for bowl eligibility themselves.
Yeah.
It's not like they're sitting pretty at the moment either. So they've got a lot to play for too. I do wonder, and I'll conclude with this: you've been in those rooms. How hard is it to put together a package for a Newkirk or a Bryce Baker and say, look, on the third series, on the fourth series, you're going to go out, you're going to run a couple of these, you're going to run this package, this set of
Mhm.
plays, and let's see if we can get a spark. Let's see if we can change the trajectory of the game. I mean, like, try something because, as you said, for 10 weeks, fans have a pretty good sense, and I think opponents have a pretty good sense of what the Carolina offense can do.
Sure, and I don't think it's hard. I think it's hard to balance the amount of reps that you get during the week. I think the standard week is you got to kind of run as many plays as you can, and so you might not get as many reps as far as full live reps throughout the year practicing that. And that was the only thing that was hard for a backup quarterback is getting the reps. Like you look at Shador, that was the first time that he ever got first team reps, and I'm like watching Get Up this morning. I'm like, wow, that makes sense because I was there. Like I never
That
got
was
first team
terrible.
reps. That was terrible. I mean, it's very honest though. During the course of a week, it's hard, when you're in the middle of a season because you're saving guys' legs. You can't get routes to, Jerry Judy. And I know from being a backup in the NFL, it's like, man, you stood there all week and it was like, hey, if you got a chance to go in, good luck. They slap you on the butt and say, oh man, you don't even know who these guys are. So it's wild and crazy to think about, but it's the reality of the sport. When I was in Denver, there's only one guy that took reps. It was Peyton Manning. Brock Osweiler was the backup, and I was behind Brock, and it was like, hey, we're gonna go watch Peyton play today. We're gonna get our reps after the practice. It just is what it is. And those guys have earned those rights. And unfortunately, I think now I don't know how they've structured practice, but you got to get a chance to see everyone you got to give everybody an opportunity to go play. Because if he leaves your program and he goes play somewhere else and has success, then it's all good. It's going to be like, well, why couldn't he done that here? So you got to find a way. You got to stay after practice. You got to get those guys prepared. And like we always had like the offensive coordinator took the starter, and then like we had GAs and graduate assistants and quality controls that would take the other guys to the other field and run through their script. So it was a kind of like two separate scripts. Like I would have my offense over here, and then the backup would have the offense over there, just so he was prepared in case in case they can go in, because that's what Shador said this post game. He goes, I haven't even run these plays before. And so it's like it's a wild situation. But that's why you play the sport.
I mean, one good thing about having Max Johnson as your backup is a guy who's seen a lot of stuff. You probably feel comfortable putting him out there. I mean, there are a lot of fans and others saying, "Hey, you got to play Bryce Baker. You got to play." Bryce Baker obviously was a highly touted recruit from North Carolina. A lot of people have seen him or at least heard his name for a long time. They want him out there. Again, I mean, maybe that's the cynic in me. I'm thinking he wasn't even the backup against Richmond. He wasn't even the
Right.
third string guy against Richmond, and so Belichick, we've talked about these Sunday night practices. We've seen guys rise up the depth chart, Damon June, some of these wide receivers, Madrid Tucker. If that's not, and we're seeing what Gio's doing. So now you put all that together and you say, well, maybe these young guys aren't showing it. Obviously, Belichick's given other guys a chance at other
Mhm.
positions. But if they're not replacing, they haven't even thought about replacing Gio Lopez. What does that tell you about what's happening with those young players? And I know that's kind of the negative point of view. The positive point of view is like the backup's going to come in and dominate. But the negative point of view is, okay, we're seeing what Gio can do, and no one's pushing him in practice. And so Bill Belichick said time and time again, Gio gives us the best chance to win. And if that's true, then maybe you got to remake your entire room in the offseason.
Yeah, all great points. I honestly agree. I have nothing else to say. I'm with you right there. I think it's like, no, I'm in complete agreement. I think there's opportunities that need to be given across the board, and not just by position, because he's done it elsewhere. And I think it could be time to do that. And it's look, they get paid to make those decisions. So, but I completely agree with you. I think it's time.
All right, Bryn, thank you so much. You'll be at the Duke game.
I'll be at the Duke game. Yes,
Final
sir.
home game, senior day, if there is such a thing anymore in college football, but senior
Good
day
point.
for UNC as they take on Duke, 3:30 ACC network. That's a whole nother thing, but the thought was to get all these games on ESPN and ABC and the big channels. UNC was on CW back-to-back weeks. Now they're on the ACC network. But we'll be back next week to talk right before Thanksgiving, before the big season finale against NC State. Bryn Renner, thanks for joining me. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, Brian.